So you might know that right now, there's growing tension between the US and China. It's probably not good news for US companies, it's almost definitely bad news for Chinese companies, but for Korean Samsung, it's like the stars are lining up. I'm not talking a small victory here, I think this is Samsung's big shot at world technological domination. If we take a look at the top smartphone vendors globally, one thing stands out, that Huawei is huge. In the last 5 years, this company's grown from 5% market share to 20%. That's ludicrous. This company was the single biggest threat to Samsung's mobile operations. But now is where I think that ends. The US ban means that Huawei can't offer Google Apps, they can't build their own flagship chips, and now just suffers from a general lack of trust. And without these things, I think it's just a matter of time before Huawei returns to just serving the Chinese market. So just theoretically, if we took Huawei out of the picture, Samsung becomes a clear number one, leaving only really Xiaomi as a realistic Android rival. And don't get me wrong, Xiaomi will also benefit if Huawei disappears. They're already managing to scoop up current Huawei users looking for an alternative with these attractively priced, globally available devices. Plus, Xiaomi's putting particular emphasis on the fact that their phones can run Google Play services, so as not to be confused with their other Chinese counterpart. But you see, this is the issue that Xiaomi faces. A lot of the people who are unwilling to buy a Huawei phone because they don't trust it might also not be willing to buy from other Chinese brands. The US banned Chinese Huawei, they banned Chinese ZTE a few years before that, they literally just announced a ban for Chinese TikTok like a week ago. It's not looking good for Chinese brands in general. And here's the thing, right? The worse this US-China relationship gets, the better Samsung does. And a massive thanks to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring this video. Going back to that list, pretty much every one of Samsung's main competitors, Oppo, Vivo, and even a lot of companies sitting in that other section, like Realme, they're all Chinese. But Samsung dodged that bullet by being a company that is Korean and one that is publicly withdrawn from manufacturing in China, instead moving to India and Vietnam. And guess what? Those two just so happen to be regions that the US is trying to strengthen its relations with. So Samsung has kind of just found themselves in a position where people want their phones more, and they've started responding to it. This new Galaxy S20 Fan Edition was literally launched with the very purpose of capitalizing on increased appetite for Samsung, and I would fully expect them in the next year to start releasing more models than ever. Oh, and there's more. You might be aware that Apple is very soon planning to launch their first ever 5G iPhones. Now, generally when Apple does this, when they introduce a feature on their phones that has actually been around for some time, they do it in a big way. Apple is often the company to catapult relatively niche features into the mainstream. They did it with voice assistants, they did it with fingerprint scanners, they're about to do it with 5G. And the reason this helps Samsung is that, believe it or not, they are one of the few companies that builds 5G infrastructure. Now, there's a pretty reasonable chance that you had no idea Samsung did this, because the main three companies are Huawei, Nokia, and Ericsson. But Samsung is fourth, and I think they're about to climb. See, with this political conflict, China is separating from the West. I mean, Huawei has physically been ripped out of a lot of Europe's 5G infrastructure, and it's looking like China might retaliate. In the exact same way that the West has vetoed use of Huawei, it's very possible that China will just veto the use of European companies like Ericsson and Nokia. And would you believe it, that leaves Samsung as the only neutral party who could potentially supply to both sides of the conflict. And I could bet my bottom dollar they're gonna try. Literally a couple of weeks ago, Samsung signed a 5-year deal with Verizon in the US to build 5G infrastructure for them. They're already wrestling in, basically offering themselves as a China-free alternative to Huawei 5G. They've just recently dropped over $20 billion into 5G and AI, and Samsung is well on their way into planning their 6G infrastructure to come in 2028. And see, the better Samsung's networking business does, the better their smartphone business does. If Samsung starts building really close ties with Verizon and other carriers, then that puts Samsung's hardware right in the limelight for US customers, because carriers are the ones selling the phones. But there's even more to this. Something like 30% of Samsung's revenue right now is actually from its semiconductor business, which sells chips. And whilst this division might lose a bit of money in the short term, because they used to sell bits and pieces to Huawei for their phones, in the long term, it's looking pretty good. For starters, Huawei was one of the few other companies who made mobile chipsets. Every year they'd come out with an increasingly advanced Kirin chip to power their flagship phones. But the US ban makes this almost impossible. It's looking likely that after 2020, Huawei just won't be able to do it anymore. So that 20% of the market that used to be powered by Kirin is now open to being powered by Samsung. Plus, looking at the next generation, chipsets are going to be built on the tiny 5nm fabrication process, and it looks like Samsung was ready for this. It looks like Samsung has built the processes to be able to manufacture 5nm chipsets with relatively high efficiency. And that means two things. A, that Samsung's next EXYNOS processors should be way higher performance. And this is backed up by EXYNOS, who also adds that in 2022, they're gonna start building in AMD's graphics cores, which might even flip their current Achilles heel into a strength. And B, that apparently Samsung, as well as building their own, have been picked to build the next Qualcomm Snapdragon 875 chips too. Samsung's supposed efficiency means that they can offer a 5nm chip to Qualcomm for less than TSMC, who Qualcomm usually works with. So, Samsung rakes in money from Qualcomm, and at the same time might just be able to build their own EXYNOS chipset, which is comparable. And if they can do that, they will fly. Because, while Samsung can then happily use their own EXYNOS chips in their phones for no extra cost, every other Android maker will either have to fork out an extra $30 to $50 to buy one from Qualcomm, or come straight to Samsung and buy an EXYNOS chip for their phones. Either way, Samsung wins. They're in a position where they can leverage their 5G and their chipset business to push their mobile phone business forward. I mean, obviously they do still have Apple to compete with, but if US cuts ties with China, then I think even Apple will struggle. Because it's very possible that China will retaliate with the same sentiment. No one in China buy an iPhone. And even though this doesn't really directly help Samsung because Samsung has almost no market share in China, it would hurt Apple. Besides, a lot of Apple's manufacturing happens in China too, which means that if they are pressured to pull out, it might well mean they have to raise their prices for the rest of the world. But to be fair, just generally, I would argue that Samsung isn't particularly worried about Apple. I think the average consumer is actually quite averse to jumping between Android and iOS, which means that if Chinese Android brands fall in popularity, their users are way more likely to turn to Samsung as opposed to iPhone. Plus, Samsung just serves a much wider net of users than Apple. Everything from the budget section, which Apple doesn't dare build for, to foldables. Apart from Chinese companies, the only foldable competition Samsung faces is from Motorola. They would pretty much have the entire foldable market. So, the US and China seem to be falling out, and intentionally or not, I feel like Samsung is in the perfect position to gain from this. And because a lot of the world follows the US's lead, if this carries on, which is looking like it will, then this won't just be some small win for Samsung in the United States, this will be a global victory. And it could well be self-reinforcing. If all of a sudden 40% of smartphone users become Samsung users, then Samsung's gonna sell more appliances, they're gonna sell more TVs and more services, all of which will be made to work with each other. Okay, you've probably heard me talk about Surfshark VPN for a while now, and there is a reason for that. See, there are a lot of companies who want to sponsor tech channels. I've had other VPNs, I've had case manufacturers, I've had shaving companies. But Surfshark is something that I genuinely think is extremely good value. While a lot of VPNs charge like $30 a person a month, this costs just over $2 a month for everyone. And for that, you get the same anonymous secure internet browsing and the ability to access sites that are usually restricted to other parts of the world, like the US version of Netflix. Also, I mostly use this on the Mac, so it's cool that with one tap on the bar at the top, I can quick connect to the last server I was connected to. I tell people in person about Surfshark, not just people over YouTube videos. So I've left a link in the description, and if you click that and use code BOSS, you get 83% off and an extra 3 months for free. If you enjoyed this video, a sub to the channel would be unbelievable. And just take this video with a pinch of salt, there's some heavy speculation on my end in it. But thanks for watching, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I'll catch you in the next one.